Andrew Mayne has dazzled readers across the globe with his crime thrillers, and he joins us now. Hi, Andrew.
Hello there.
All right, Andrew, your latest book, Black Coral, is the second installment in a new series featuring female Sloane McPherson. What is unique about this particular series?
This focuses on Sloane, who's a young woman who's at kind of an interesting point in her life where she's pursuing a degree in anthropology or archaeology because she's kind of very curious about a lot of like Florida history and where she grew up and some of the history of her family having been involved in treasure recovery. But to sort of make ends meet, she's worked as a police recovery diver and has found herself as a police officer working for a small department, doing a lot of going into the canals and lakes and rivers to find bodies and evidence, and has realized that she might have a calling as a police officer more so than she realized. And she's pulled into a case where she has to sort of decide what is going to be her trajectory. So that's what I like. It's about a person at a point in their life that's going to decide who they're going to be.
Ah, good, good. And so she's actually called to the scene of an accident, but then something else she discovers. Tell us what happens.
So she's becoming, and this is the second book as we see her along in her journey. And so now her skills as a detective are starting to sort of form, and she looks for things that are unusual. Before she was at a point where people would like, this is what's going on, find us the evidence for this. Now she's aware of things because she's working with another detective who's been kind of an influence on her. And so she notices that things are quite not what she thinks, what everybody else thinks they are. And so she decides she needs to pursue this further. And I don't want to give away too much, but
no.
I may be too vague here.
Yeah, if I ask you too many revealing questions, just pass. Because my next question is, do you want to tell us who Big Bill is now, or should we just leave that alone?
I think we can say it's a book. Big Bill's a gator, and it's sort of loosely based on a real alligator in Florida, a huge alligator. And so I put in, she swims in the water a lot, and there's a lot of other things that live in the water, and they're not necessarily antagonistic, but they're not exactly there to help you along.
Okay. Well, now I'm intrigued by the fact that you tell the entire story in first-person viewpoint, and we are in Sloane's head the entire way. And it's almost as if she's in an omnipotent viewpoint, and yet she's in her viewpoint, and it's just really unusual to find this kind of thing. How did you learn to write that sort of dialogue?
So I stole that idea. It was actually from Susan Collins reading The Hunger Games. And when I'd already written a couple novels, and then when I encountered that done really well, where you're put into first person present tense into the mind of a character, it felt very fresh to me. And also what I liked is, as authors, we often sort of struggle with what voice do we use, even when we're doing, third person omniscient. Like, how do I sound as an author? Do I sound like I throw in a lot of details? Do I use a shorthand to describe things? By choosing the character's voice to tell the story, it simplifies things because I understand how Sloane would think about this as it's going along. It also helps so much because I like to do really, really strongly character-driven stories. And so if every word is something the character is thinking, is super helpful because I never deviate far. I know what she wants in every scene. I know what goes on in every sentence. And it's sometimes not what the writer wants. It's what that character tells me this is what I need to do.
That's cool. Well, the book reads almost like a movie script. Is that intentional?
I think very visually. Like, I try to put myself in the scene and to sort of see things. And I think that probably, I was, as a kid, I loved, my discovery of books and movies probably happened at the same time, in just as forms. and probably one sort of drove the other. So probably it's a lot like how I read a book. It's sort of how it's how I would write a book, even though it may not be the way it was written, but sort of what goes on in my head.
Well, how long did it take you to write Black Coral?
The writing process itself is generally doesn't take me too long. But it's thinking about it. I think about I'll think about a book for a long time. Might sit me with months. Sometimes a book might sit me with for years. And then when I sit down to write, the outlining takes a couple of days and the writing takes, a week or two.
Wow. And I will ask you a little bit more about that later, but how did you get the idea for the underwater series? Are you yourself an underwater enthusiast?
I am a scuba diver. I've even had my own Shark Week special on Discovery Channel. So I grew up in Florida, spending a lot of time in the water. So I love the water. And I've been writing a number of other series. I had my Jessica Blackwood series, my Theo Cray series. I'm like, man, I never really did anything based on growing up in Florida and, what that was like. And so that's sort of where that sort of came from. I was like, wow, I guess I should probably use this.
Okay. And you've written nearly 20 novels and 2 nonfiction books, I think. Your latest series, and really a lot of your series, feature female protagonists. How do you feel about writing from a female viewpoint?
I mean, I just try to write from the point of view of a person, and I have a character that's from Texas, and I didn't grow up in Texas, and I just try to keep it true to that. But I don't think I would ever tell a Texan what it's like to be a Texan. I just try to keep it true to sort of my understanding. And I like to use different viewpoints to do stuff. It started off when I did the Jessica Blackwood novels, because I was writing about a woman who was in the FBI, but who grew up in a family of stage magicians. And there had been sort of the magic detective archetype had been done a few times in fiction, and to me kind of just had become kind of a cliche. And I thought it would be interesting with that character. Like, what if I take something that we assume, there's not a lot of women in magic for multiple reasons. Can be very chauvinistic and a lot of other issues about it. So I said, okay, I have a character who's highly skilled, but is in law enforcement, which is, very male dominated, and she has to deal with the fact that she's working with people that might not like the fact that she's smarter than they are. And so it made what would seem like an overpowered character vulnerable, which is what I liked. With Sloane, it really just came down to, she's based on a couple of people I know who, have women who grew up in Florida who are very, very athletic, very snarky, very into the water. And I'm like, I gotta capture this personality in a book.
Yeah, I think you did. You did very well. You're the author of How to Write a Novella in 24 Hours. What is your secret?
So since I wrote that, I actually did NaNoWriMo in one day. And it was not a good book, but I used dictation to do that one. And that was like, just could you do a 60,000 word novel all in one day by just quickly putting together an outline? And it was more of an exercise to just sort of say, like, writer's block is in your head. If you don't think it's real, then you'll just move past it. Obviously, it's better to be a little bit more thoughtful about what you write. For me, the key is, I went from a person that could have struggled to write a page, like to write a page was a struggle for me. And I had to sort of dive down in and say, why is that? And I think we're all creative, and it's trying to understand, sometimes when we don't feel creative, it's because we're not asking the right questions. And once you learn to ask questions, then it becomes a lot easier. So for me, for writing and to have a really good flow kind of comes down to having the right questions answered and leaving enough ones unanswered that'll make it fun to write. So I outline like crazy. Not to say that I write like novel length outlines, but I outline down to a chapter level before I sit down to write. And I have a clear idea of what the conflict is at the start and at the end, and maybe a bit of the setup. And then when I sit down to write that chapter, it gets to be kind of a game. I get to have fun. Like, what's going to happen? Let me throw this character in there, and now let me solve this puzzle and have the character figure out their way through it.
Oh, that's interesting. in addition to writing novels, you're an innovative illusionist, as the star of A&E's Don't Trust Andrew Mayne, and you've even had your own fans who call themselves maniacs. Um, how has your magic worked its way into your novels, or has it?
I think there was sort of a parallel path. When I was a kid and I first became interested in magic, it's like, oh, look, this is cool. Something happened. You know, the magician just made, you know, a coin appear out of nowhere. And you're like, oh, and you don't think about why. And as you think about why, then it becomes more interesting. Storytelling can be the same way. You know, when I was young, I loved premises. I loved world building, but a real story is characters. And once you can design a magic effect that you give what happens meaning because there's a conflict that resolves it, then if you can apply that in storytelling, it makes for great storytelling. And so I've had this sort of separate but parallel sort of realizations in both of them. And, you know, magic is about surprise, but that surprise should feel obvious and earned, not how it was done, but that was the natural conclusion in the end.
Oh, that's also interesting. How did you get your first break in publishing?
Self-publishing. I did not want to wait for permission. I did not want to wait for an agent or a publisher or somebody to tell me that I was good enough, because I thought about it. And, you know, when you hear that Harry Potter got rejected something like 40 times before it got published,
Right.
it's telling about the industry. And not to say that everybody did that made a bad decisions. A lot of publishers are going to be like, this is great, but it doesn't fit us. We wouldn't be able to serve the material. And so that tells you that having a publisher say yes or no doesn't mean that, oh, it's pass, fail, your book is good or not. It just means it's the reality of the industry. And so I knew I wanted to reach audiences. I wanted people to read my books. Having a publisher say, hey, we approve, you know, you passed this test, was not important to me. It really wasn't. So I started with I wrote a novella, and I got a pretty good response, a science fiction novella. And I said, okay, I'm a capable enough writer. And then I wrote a book called Public Enemy Zero. And that did really, really well as a self-published book. It made it into like the top, 100 or so for Amazon books. And that started to get attention. And then I had a movie deal out of that. And then I actually had got my agent from there. But even then I was still self-publishing, trying to find a fit, because I was having trouble finding a fit with a publisher. And I self-published another book, which was originally Angel Killer, which became a series. I self-published that, and that went crazy. I was one of the top 10 best-selling authors on Amazon that year. I made their list of the top 10 selling, Kindle publishing authors. And then publishers were like, oh, we like this, let's publish this. But you think about it, it took me cracking the top 10 of indie authors for a publisher to say, yes, we think we'll publish your book. So it's kind of crazy. And I encourage people, I have a great agent now, Erica Silverman and Trident Media. They're wonderful. I work with a great publisher. Amazon Publishing has been fantastic. And it's been a journey to sort of find what the right fit is and for that to work. But I would tell people, don't be afraid to go on your own. There are indie authors out there having wonderful careers as writers, not waiting for an email for somebody to say, hey, you've been approved.
Okay. How many more books will be in the Underwater series?
How many more books will people read? I love writing Sloan, and I think that she has a lot of growth going. She's got a daughter, and so she's trying to manage that. She's got a very unusual sort of relationship with her on again, off again boyfriend, who's a father of her daughter, and she's trying to juggle her own identity, who she is, how to be a mother, plus dealing with the worst people in the world. And so there's always going to be a lot of complications, not to mention her family, who are basically pirates, let's call it that. She's got a lot to deal with. And I've enjoyed writing her. And if people enjoy reading her, I think we'll just see where it goes.
Okay. And then after that, what's next for you? Are you going to do another series? Or are you going to do?
I do. So I have 2 series right now. So I've been doing the Sloan McPherson. I have the Theo Cray series, which is he's a computational biologist who hunts serial killers. So I have a book coming out later this year where Theo is actually teaming up with Jessica Blackwood, who was one of my other characters. So who I mentioned before. So now I'm taking those two characters where Theo is this brilliant scientist who could, tell you everything about, the bacteria on a knife. Jessica is going to be like, yes, but why was it used to murder that person? And so putting the two together was fun. I had a delight writing the book Mastermind. And so we're going to be getting probably a Theo and Jessica book every year, along with a Sloan McPherson book for every year.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Andrew, Mayne, we really want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
That's Andrew Mayne. He's author of Black Coral, just out from Thomas and Mercer, an Amazon company.